Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 3rd of May. I'm Robert Barwick, and today I welcome back the CEC leader, Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks, Robbie. It's been good to be back, I can tell you.
Well, we've missed you.
No, thanks.
All right, in this week's CEC Report, we have a special report by Craig Isherwood on the global fight for Glass-Steagall. CEC leads the fight to save WA's farmers from the banks, and finally defeat the merchants of death. So first, a special report by Craig Isherwood on the global fight for Glass-Steagall. So Craig, you've just returned from a major conference in Germany on the fight for a Glass-Steagall, and you've had follow-up meetings in the United States. So we're going to talk about that, but before we do, we have to announce the very sad news that the CEC has just lost its Tasmanian State Secretary, Adrian Watts. So Adrian was a stalwart of the CEC's activism in Tasmania. He stood up to be State Secretary about 4 years ago when we needed him, when we had a vacancy there. And since then he's covered a lot of the state tirelessly on behalf of the CEC. And on Monday evening, Adrian appears to have suffered a massive heart attack and passed away.
Yeah, so Adrian took on a really courageous role down there in Tasmania because, you know, Tasmania in some places, some people think people go to escape.
Yeah.
And that's true. And the other point is it's also the home of the biggest green activism in the country. So constantly Adrian was battling very courageously against these two particular elements, trying to get people to wake up to the fact that Tasmania is not a separate country in the world, and it is in fact part of the world. And you know, for many, many years, Adrian just tirelessly battled by going around to all of the very small towns in northern Tasmania in particular, talking to people about the CEC's work. And he represents a major loss to our organisation because of not just the fact that he did this work, but his own personality. He was a very unique guy.
So we'll publish a CEC memorial to Adrian fairly soon, which I do encourage people to read. We'll try and sort of capture the spirit of what he achieved down there. But he's going to be sorely missed by the CEC family. So we just wanted to acknowledge that at this time. And now we get back to the subject at hand, Craig. So from your trip, which was a very strategic one, you know, I was involved and we were making the decision for you to go over there. Just brief the viewers, what is the state of the global fight for this emergency Glass-Steagall solution to the global financial crisis?
Well, Robbie, I think the first thing you have to realise, the thrust of this conference was that unless Glass-Steagall is adopted in the United States, there is no hope for any other place in the world. And the support for Glass-Steagall in the US is growing by every day, with more and more state legislators adopting resolutions demanding that the federal government, the Obama government, adopt Glass-Steagall.
Just on that, why is it so important for the US? Why can't it sort of happen in say, Europe
Robbie,
first?
The problem right now is the world's being held to ransom by this British puppet called Obama. And unless Obama's power is broken, you know, the British Empire is going to succeed in two major policies. One is population reduction, right? It intends to reduce the world's population down from the 7 billion it is now down to 1 billion. The major tool that you've got there is this whole monetary system, which literally is destroying countries like you see with Cyprus, Greece, and so forth. Look, this is not an accidental policy. This is an intentional policy of British monetarism, right? So unless you get rid of British, and the flip side of that is that they don't care whether it's done through the slow method of literally starving people to death, and I mean literally, or whether they provoke a nuclear war. As you see this escalation of things in Syria, in particular recent periods, with the declaration, that, you know, the blind declaration by Obama that there's chemical weapons and across the red line and all this sort of stuff. Well, if we get into a nuclear war, well, that's the end of the world's population as we know it. We can force the extinction of mankind. So unless you get rid of Obama, Robbie, there's no way that we're going to get a Glass-Steagall.
Because Obama is blocking, the US has constitutional powers that give the people, through the legislature, the authority over the money system. And of course, that's been used before. Lincoln used it, Roosevelt used it. Alexander Hamilton used it. Obama is blocking that on behalf of his British controllers.
That's right. And see, this is where the whole pack of cards can come down. If you get rid of Obama, then you're going to have a free ability to implement Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall is not a difficult policy, Robbie. The separation of the commercial banking system from the speculative banking system is what's required here through legislation. And don't think the oligarchs, the financial oligarchs that control the system, don't already know that their system's finished. They do, right? They'll be prepared to completely wipe out the existing financial system, providing they maintain the political power.
So, and Craig, the level of support in the US for Glass-Steagall and the fact that it really is close, that the showdown is at its most close in the United States, that itself exhibits a big difference between America's political system and the parliamentary systems of Europe, where there's a lot of support for Glass-Steagall, but in terms of legislatures, there's people that are trying to put stuff up, but it's going nowhere because of this suppressing ability of the oligarchy through the parliaments.
Yeah, that's right, Robbie. And I think this is why, Helga Zeppler-Rouche, who I met with over in Europe, in Germany, has called for an international mobilisation to call for the legislators in the US to actually recognise their unique role as a presidential system to get Glass-Steagall introduced. And she's made an international call where legislators and leaders from all around the world actually appeal to the US senators and congressmen to get the Glass-Steagall in position. See, when you go to Germany, it's a bit shocking, Rob, because I haven't been there in 20 years, but the place has absolutely been smashed. I mean, here you had a very proud country, Germany, back, say, 20 years ago. It had its own parliament. Now that's been superseded or subsumed by the European Union, by Brussels. It had its own currency, which has been superseded by the euro. It had a fantastic nuclear power development program, which has all been shut down. And what you see if you drive through the landscape are these monsters called wind turbines. And literally there are thousands of them pitted all over the hills and all through the rural areas of Germany. And when I looked at those things, I said, this is the British Empire laughing at Germany. They've smashed their sovereignty. Now here in Australia, right, we've still got a rotten parliamentary system, which was given to us by design by the British Empire through what's called responsible government in the 1860s and 1870s, as a direct response to the republican current that we have in our country. Fortunately, we still have our own Australian dollar, even though it's used as a carry trade at the present time. We still have a country divided by a sovereign parliament which rules over a sovereign territorial area. So, we have certain advantages here. We haven't had a revolution to overthrow the British, but in Germany, they were a sovereign country that's being smashed. And the pessimism that you see, unfortunately, is only going to be solved if, and this is the reason we went to Germany, is that unless people of like mind unite, as Helga said, one fist across 5 continents, well, our continent was represented in Europe as this one part of the fist, right? So, it was incredibly important to meet up with our Russian compatriots, who are fighting for the same thing. All of this is actually reported on the Schiller Institute New Paradigm website, where people can go and look at all the speeches.
We'll put a link on the screen for that.
And yeah, you can see just how much in depth this conference was, and we were represented and had a very profound time listening to the different speeches and different representations from all over the world, which is a very unique experience.
And you got to make an address which we played here on the CEC Report a few weeks ago.
Yes, because we have, just to finish, Robbie, we have a unique role in that we understand the British Empire. We're inside it. We're in the belly of the beast, so to speak. Yeah. So, and this is something that the Europeans don't get.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for that, Craig. When we come back, we're going to talk about another aspect of this fight for Glass-Steagall and the productive economy, which is how the CEC is leading the fight to save WA's farmers from the banks. Welcome back to the CEC Report. The CEC leads the fight to save Western Australia's farmers from the banks. The plight of the farmers in the eastern wheat belt, Craig, of Western Australia is dire. Now, we've talked about this the last 2 weeks in a row. The more news comes out, the worse it gets. Basically, as of right now, as many as 1,200 farmers could be forced off the land within weeks because the banks are withholding credit en masse. And it's within weeks because it's planting season now.
Don't you love it, Robbie, that the banks are now dictating policy for the Australians? That this is pure banking policy directing what happens to Australian farmers?
Well, actually, I don't love it, Craig, but you're right. That's exactly, it's transparent. Right?
That's the point, is that where's the sovereign government here? Why aren't governments acting in the interest of the farmers and not in the interest of the banks?
Well, and on that, the state government of Western Australia was asked by the farmers, look, we need $100 million in credit to alleviate the debt burden. The debt burden is $12 billion is shared by 4,300 farmers over there. That's their debt, $12 billion. They're paying between 9 and 12% interest on that debt. That means $1.5 billion is coming out of the wheat belt every year in interest alone. The farmers said, look, if we can't plant this crop this year, and by the way, it's looking like it could be a good season, the rain's coming at the right time for the planting, etc. If we can't plant this crop this year, this is our last chance. So on cue, the farmers said, no, the bankers have said, oh, well, we're not going to give you money.
Genocide, Robbie. There's only one word for it.
But in terms of dictating to them, before the state government announced its package to assist, which ended up being an offer of $20,000 for farmers who want to leave the land, so the state government is helping them off the farms, the state government met with the banks first to decide what that policy will be.
It just underlines the facts the banks, the political parties are subservient to the banks.
Exactly. So Jean Robinson, the CEC's State Secretary in Western Australia, she recorded the following emergency statement the other day, which we'll play now for people.
Hello, I'm Jean Robinson. I'm the State Secretary of the Citizens Electoral Council and also the candidate for the federal seat of O'Connor. I'm speaking to you today because I'm very concerned about the financial and economic crisis that's actually destroying the family farmer here in WA. Colin Barnett and his government today have announced nothing that's going to do anything to help our family farmers. It's not going to resolve any of the problems. In actual fact, it is a cruel joke and an insult to the integrity and the very foundation of our national economy, the family farmer. If I were the Premier, what I would do immediately is I'd actually deal with the real problem that's facing our nation, which is actually a banking crisis, the bankruptcy of our banking system. And what needs to be done is we need to reorganise and re-regulate and reform our banking system with what's called the Glass-Steagall Act, which is what Roosevelt used in 1933. This will separate normal banking from highly risky speculative banking. And I suggest that you hop on our website immediately and sign our parliamentary petition calling for Australian Glass-Steagall. Also, what actually needs to be done is to actually address the unpayable debt. And we need a domestic debt moratorium and a restructure of debt to actually do that. This will free our food production from the looting of bankers' usury. And thirdly, the most vital aspect of actually ensuring that a crop gets planted this year and the ongoing profitability and production of our agriculture is by recreating a new national bank of credit, like the Commonwealth Bank, or for Western Australia, which actually can be done very easily, the recreation of the R&I Bank. Because we need to reissue public credit immediately to all those family farmers so they can actually continue farming this year and for many more years. But by recreating the institution of public credit, we can also provide the capital to build masses of infrastructure projects, which is badly needed to create a real economic recovery. But not only that, we actually need to build masses of water projects to actually drought-proof Western Australia, because that would end the insanity of farmers having to rely wholly and solely on the weather of whether they're going to get crops or not. And it's up to us to actually make sure that we can build 21st century infrastructure projects to actually prevent this and to ensure our national food security. If these measures aren't implemented, we are going to see the total collapse of our economy. And I suggest that you contact us immediately, because everybody needs to get a copy of our latest New Citizen, which will educate you into how to re-establish a public system of credit and how it actually works. Thank you.
So that was the CEC's WA State Secretary, Jean Robinson. Craig, all the talk over there is about which farmers are viable. So that's what they talk about. The question is, will Australia remain viable as a nation if we keep destroying our food producers?
Robbie, we've said many times in our publications, we've said many times on this show, the intention of the financial oligarchy through the British Crown is population reduction from 7 billion down to 1 billion people. This policy is part of that policy, and people need to understand that this is a genocidal policy. If a government reacts on that basis, you could easily save 1,200 farmers, and you could come up with schemes, as has been done before, in order that their produce is actually used for the benefit of all mankind, particularly in a situation when you have a global food shortage.
Well, we're putting out a statement today, Craig, headline, "The government guaranteed the banks, so guarantee WA's wheat growers now," because in 2008, when it was the banks who had no credit from their international lenders, they were about to go bankrupt. The federal government stepped in and not only guaranteed those banks so they could borrow, they gave them their AAA credit rating to borrow with, so the banks were able to borrow very, very cheaply. That was 2008. So what's more important? Banks in trouble or a cornerstone of the world's food supply? That's what the WA wheat growers are. Most of that wheat is exported for the world food trade. They're a cornerstone of it. The government, if the government show it can do that, it can immediately step in with a similar type of thing. They don't have to set up any institution or anything. Step in and allow the farmers to borrow through them on their AAA credit rating to finance this year's crop and get that debt off their back. There's no excuse for any farmer to be forced off the land in the next few weeks.
Robbie, bankers live in tall buildings. They don't have to put up with no rain or plenty of rain, drought or flood. Right? They don't have to worry about high interest rates because they create them. They don't have to worry about export markets that are governed by cartels. Right? So here you are saying the government stepped in and protected these banks, but with the farmers who are subject to all these other real parameters, we won't look after them. I mean, this is a stinking policy, and it's a policy of genocide, pure and simple, on behalf of the British financial system to destroy our nation through our food producing capacity.
All right, so as we said, there's no excuse. Now, when we come back, we're going to follow up with this theme because we're going to talk about the global grain trade, Craig, and the cartels that are trying to prey on these farmers at the moment.
Did you say slave trade or grain trade?
Well, I said grain, but you're right, it's a slave trade, and we're calling it Defeat the Merchants of Death. Welcome back to the CEC Report. So finally, defeat the merchants of death. Before the break, we were talking about the WA wheat growers crisis. Part of the agenda there, Craig, is that, and it's quite transparent, here's the banks all of a sudden, just when the farmers need it most, they need to finance this year's crop to get them out of the hole. The banks have said to 600, no finance, and there's another 600 that their circumstances can change very quickly and the banks can foreclose on them. And what they're doing is trying to bring the farmers to their knees, so they're forced to agree to something. And what they want them to agree to is to privatise and sell Australia's last great rural cooperative, which is called CBH, Cooperative Bulk Handling. Now, this is one of those co-ops that the farmers built themselves over decades and decades, right? In the old days, before the Australian Wheat Board and all that assistance was given to farmers, farmers used to grow their wheat, have to put it in bags themselves, take the bags of wheat to the railway siding, stack up the bags of wheat, a lot of intensive handling. And what the farmers, because it's intensive handling, and it was just individual farmers acting and waiting for the train to come, there was no, costs were high. So what CBH was a way for the farmers to set up a co-op that could bulk handle the wheat and make sure that when the trains came, they were full, right? So that each trip was its most efficient, getting the wheat to the port, and the wheat could be stored, and the farmers chipped in for that. And the benefit was it drove the costs of the shipping right down.
Robbie, I was reading that it's possible to store wheat up to 25 years. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know
I mean,
that.
the point is that if it's stored properly, you can look after the crop for up to 25 years, which means that...
So if it's not the farmer's responsibility anymore, he can keep doing his job.
Yeah, and the government could then market that in the sense as a real asset to various parts of the world for in exchange for all sorts of other commodities.
So what's happened is, anything like this, there are global grain trading companies that are privately owned, and so private they're not even on share markets. They're privately controlled. You can't read their annual reports. And the definitive story on these is this book here called Merchants of Grain by Dan Morgan. And it's not even an expose. He's just telling how it works. But I want to read a quote for people just to understand what the farmers have been exposed to. So this is from chapter 9 of the book, and chapter 9 is called Catch-22, and he's using an example to explain the grain trading system. In Joseph Heller's Catch-22, Milo Minder-Binder keeps the Air Force messes supplied with fresh eggs. Milo buys the eggs in Malta for 7 cents, sells them to the mess halls for 5, and still makes a profit. Everybody has a share, and it isn't as hard as it sounds. Milo first buys the eggs in Sicily for only a penny at the hen. He transfers them secretly to Malta, sells them for 4.5 cents, buys them back for 7, and resells them to the Air Force for 5. When his friend Yossarian expresses puzzlement, he explains, "I'm the people I buy them from." Heller must have known something about commodity trading when he drew this portrait of a war entrepreneur, because modern grain companies operate in a very similar fashion. And he goes on to explain in this book how the grain cartels, Craig, they profit from uncertainty and wild price fluctuations. That's what they seek. Whereas farmers profit from certainty and stable prices, right? That's the best circumstance under which to grow food. So the global grain companies, their whole existence is at odds with the ability of the world to feed itself. The farmers who do the growing of what we eat, right, they need a system that is stable. Now, we had the wheat board. This CBH operation does that, but that's why these grain cartels are determined to destroy it. Yeah. And in this case, the banks are working hand in hand with them.
There's various ways you can do this, Robbie. Like Franklin Roosevelt confronted the same problems during the Depression when cotton farmers couldn't sell their cotton. The price of cotton was something like 7 cents. He mandated the Reconstruction Finance Corporation set up the Commodities Trading Corporation. That trading corporation then actually bought the cotton at a mandated, I think it was 9 cents, or could have been 12 cents per pound, right? And it held that cotton on behalf of the farmer, so that basically the corporation loaned the farmer the money at 12 cents per pound, based upon the fact that the cotton was held as collateral. And then when the farmer then had the opportunity to sell that at a future date, when the price went above 12 cents, and consequently the farmer was kept liquid. There's all these sorts of schemes that are available, Robbie, but the intention is, do you want to protect the people, do you want to protect our producers, or do you want to wipe them out through genocidal policies?
Well, and this has never been more clear-cut as in the case of the WA farmers right now. All right, well, we've run out of time for this week's CEC Report. Thanks again, Craig. Thanks for returning. And thanks for tuning in. Tune in next week for more of the CEC Report.